Hello and welcome back, and do you know what? We need to talk about 5 gigabit networking, or 5GBE. Over the last year or so, we've suddenly seen solutions arrive on the scene with, instead of 1 gig, instead of 2.5 gig, arriving with 5 gig external networking there. And I think because half of the people are really chuffed about it, knowing they're getting even more bandwidth and bang for their buck in a turnkey NAS solution, and there's a bunch of other people going, why on earth wouldn't you go straight to 10 GBE? So that's what this video is about. I'm going to give you 4 reasons why 5 gigabit networking is a good thing right now in 2026. But I'm also going to give you 4 reasons why you might want to give it a big old miss. But before we go any further, these solutions here on the table, I'm going to point at them quite a lot in this video because they're quite pertinent to a number of the points. There's some other bits and bobs, but this is a LockerStore Gen 2 Plus edition, and this down here is the TerraMaster F4 SSD. Both of these arriving with Intel quad-core quite efficient CPUs, and both of them arriving with 5 gigabit networking. And crucially, these are both available right now. There are bigger and more powerful solutions available from both brands, but in both of the reviews of these systems, I praised them for featuring 5 gigabit networking. This video, the review of this is still on the way, but the 5 gig networking here, a couple of on there, and just a single port on this one. These arrive at pretty much the same price as 1 gig and 2.5 gig options in the market there. So number one, before we go even further, it is worth highlighting right now that 5 gigabit networking solutions are kind of at the point now where they're arriving at 2.5 gigabit networking pricing. We also have to agree that 10 gigabit networking is going to give you more bang for your buck in terms of performance all the way through. This video is not about me saying that 5 gig is better than 10 gig, because everyone's got a different user case scenario. But at the very least, I just want you to remember, before we proceed with our points, that 5 gigabit network solutions are in the market, and they're arriving at the same price point as their 2.5 gig options before then. This is about 5 GBE becoming the standard and not 2.5 and 1 gig. So let's crack on with our pros and cons. Do you want to know one of the main reasons why it was so easy for 2.5 gig to start being replaced by 5 gigabit networking ports? And easy is relative, of course. It's that unlike scaling up to 10 gigabit networking on a manufacturing level, there's less power being consumed, there's less heat being generated, and less concerns for scaling up existing systems like these in terms of cooling. Now, when we look at ASUS, great example here with their LockerStore series, they have a 10 gig equipped version in the LockerStore Gen 3 big beefy model. It's more expensive, of course, but also the piping inside, the layout and cooling had to be scaled up, not only because of the CPU inside, but also because of the increased network bandwidth going on there. 5GBE can be a much easier scale up from 2.5 GB, and that goes down to the controller level as well. Yes, the availability of 5 gig controller NICs, and we'll get onto that later on, the NIC controller is slightly different, but it is worth highlighting that the scale up from 2.5 gig systems into 5 GBE has been made a great deal easier and maintain that price point because of lesser concerns than scaling up to 10 GBE in terms of cooling, heat generation overall, and fan control. And it would be remiss not to highlight cost. Let's face it, these brands making their scale up from 1 gig and 2.5 gig solutions into 5 GBE as the network standard in 2026 has been made possible due to the increased affordability of 5 gig networking components. It's still not quite at parity from what the different manufacturers I've spoken to with 2.5 gig network controllers and manufacturing upgrading things, but it's easier from a production line point of view to scale up 2.5 gig controllers onto 5 gig controllers on those boards, but also just generally the components themselves being a lot more, there being a lot more parity. Now, 10 GBE by comparison, scaling up a solution towards 10 GBE or creating a brand new solution with 10 GBE requires more expensive controllers. And again, rather than bang on about the heating and the cooling, it basically comes down to more price being spent on the general solution, which then gets passed on to the consumer, home or business user. So 5 GBE is just generally a better value proposition currently, at least on a hardware level. I know there's going to be people that disagree with my point there about a value proposition at a hardware level. And by the way, that is not a universal argument. Wait until we get onto the cons. But I will highlight one of the things that makes it an attractive proposition, at least in terms of solutions like these that knock around for between $399 and the $550, $599 mark when we're going from a combined 4 hard drive, 4 NVMe and pure NVMe solution, is to do with the allocation of the bandwidth internally. Both of these, as mentioned, arrive with the quad-core Intel CPU, the N1505 Celeron, and the N95 from Intel, a newer generation CPU. Now, they both arrive with not a lot of PCIe lanes to play with. PCIe lanes are effectively all the pathways from the CPU and the chipset, but we're not going to overcomplicate it, to all the different areas of the system, the ports, the connections, the storage media, and more. A 5 gig networking controller can get away with a ×1 speed lane being allocated there. Again, at 2×1, if you're using an older CPU like the Celeron there, which is the Gen 2, actually it might be a Gen 3, I take that back, I'm thinking of an older processor. But if you're running a system that's only got 8 or 9 lanes to play with, you want to kind of ensure that the network connections aren't using up too much bandwidth. And you can get away with a ×1 speed lane for the 5 gig network ports, just like you did with the 2.5s. If you're running a 10 gig connection, it's not quite as straightforward. You generally have to apply at least a minimum Gen 3 × 2. Otherwise, you're going to get quite noticeably bottlenecked, although a 5 gig connection and a Gen 2 × 1 connection would be throttled. It has to be said that overall, with these more efficient CPUs coming out the gate right now, 5GBE is easier to allocate onto these systems with these more efficient, lower lane distributed processors than you can with 10GBE, where we have seen some of the Intel Alder Lake and Twin Lake systems, like the Link Station, for example, arriving with 10 gigabit networking on board, but only a single connection, and it's had to pair things back in other ways. 5GBE is much more efficient in terms of lane allocation and therefore allows for more efficient, affordable systems to roll out the gate with that than 10GBE without it harming the price point. And moving outside of NAS, we can talk about the accessories, because if you are going to scale up to 10GBE, you're generally going to spend, if you go for an unknown brand for a PCIe upgrade card, you might be spending about $60 to $70. But if you want to spend on a named brand or a recognized card for PCIe, you're looking at $80 to $100, maybe $120. And if you're looking at USB connected upgrades, well, you're either looking at Thunderbolt or USB upgrades, which start at around $100, go up to about $180, or you're looking at USB 3.2 Gen 2 X2, which is a rare old connection for a USB standard to 10 gig network upgrade. Now, 5 gigabit networking, by comparison, PCIe 5 gig network cards are like $20 to $30. And if you want to go to USB adapters like this one, this is the Mint Who's. Never heard of it, but we have used it several times. It uses USB pass-through. It's a lovely little adapter. I'll link to it below. These knock around for about $30, and there are plenty of $30 5 gig network upgrades that allow you to immediately add a 5 gigabit network connection to your client system and therefore bridge the gap between these. 5GBE network accessories are just more affordable than 10 gig options. But 5 gigabit networking, let's face it, it's not for everyone. I've already said a few nice things. Unfortunately, let's change gears and talk about the problems with 5 gigabit networking. Some of you may have noticed that in the pros, I didn't mention that when you want to scale up from a 1 gig or 2 gig connected NAS, 2.5 gig connected NAS into 5GBE, I didn't really mention the fact that you can still reuse all of your cables. Because if you've got copper cables, either built in and trunked into the walls or just generally laying around, you can still use these cables in a 1 and 2.5 gig into a 5 gig situation. You can also use it, by the way, if you move towards a 10 gig connection over copper, although make sure you are using at least Cat6 cabling over distance. However, some users aren't aware that their initial setup, which may be a 10 gig setup, you might be thinking, oh, I can swap in, rather than my 2.5 gig NAS, I can put in a 5 gigabit NAS and enjoy that little extra bit of bandwidth without losing too much. A lot of devices use cheaper controllers which don't support auto negotiation. So you might be running a 1 gig network but you've got 10 gig hardware that you were hoping to scale towards, and you're thinking a 2.5, or in this case a 5 gig switch in the middle could be enjoyed. Unfortunately, no. Some switches, again, you find this a lot more in unmanaged switches that use particularly cheap SoCs. You find that they don't support auto-negotiation, and therefore all of your 5 gig kit will immediately go down to 1 gig. Double check your auto-negotiation, but also it can hamper some of these quite seamless network modular upgrades where you think, oh, I can just swap things in one by one. Your switch, which is one of the most important parts of that network, if you don't have auto negotiation, 5GBE is going to be largely wasted on you. Do you remember earlier when I said all those nice things about adapters on 5GBE being a lot affordable? Well, move away from the PCIe adapters and USB adapters and go to actual client hardware like switches and PCs and laptops and stuff. Very few actually have 5 gigabit networking as standard. We're seeing 2.5 gig NICs on client hardware get a little bit more common, but unlike wireless connectivity, where now we're seeing Wi-Fi 6, 6E and 7 Wi-Fi enabled devices arrive at pretty much the same price point, if you try to buy client hardware that has a 5 gig network port, you either end up with an expensive bit of kit, or you end up with almost no 5Gs to play with. Whereas if you look at 10 gig equipped client hardware like switches and routers, they're just more available, and therefore that does affect the pricing as well. The adoption of 5GBE in client hardware has not been great, and because we saw 1 gig and 2.5 gig grow in popularity and availability, and that brought down the price of 10 gig in terms of copper, at least availability and pricing, the result was that 5GBE doesn't have a lot of flexibility to play with. And like any new available technology, it has arrived more expensive, bringing it close to 10GBE, and therefore making people think, well, it's only that much more. Why not just spend a little bit more? And again, a lot of that is to do with the client hardware. Yes, you can scale up with cheap adapters, but a lot of users will look at the price of those extra adapters when they've already got pre-existing 10 gig options in their client hardware and just think, I'll just spend the extra. This next one, going back to NAS, your mileage will vary. In 2026, 5GBE is fast approaching the same level of bottleneck in terms of storage media as 2.5 gig had back in the day. When we look at modern SSDs, we're seeing less and less utilization of SATA SSDs and their availability, and manufacturers looking at the shortages of NAND and AI sucking all the air out of the room are looking at M.2 as their primary source of distribution for SSDs. These, even in the lowest bandwidth, you're looking at 1,000 megs easy from these. That's already double that of a single 5 gig NIC. Now, yes, solutions like this one here from Acer's store have got 2 5 gig NICs, which means if you're running link aggregation, you're running not so much load balancing, because that's one or the other, but SMB multi-channel, for example, you can combine those, but you still need to have extra ports up and running. It's a little bit more complicated, and ultimately, you're still going to be only getting around 1,000 to maybe 1,200 megabytes per second there. Now, these SSDs can still oversaturate. This system, alongside 4 hard drives, has got 4 M.2 NVMe bays inside, which is lovely. But it's still way more than these ports can output. Hell, when we move it to the other side, it's got 4 hard drive bays. A bog standard NAS hard drive now will comfortably give you 180 megabytes per second. Stick 4 of them in a RAID, that will largely fill that 5 gig connection easily there. And once you factor in the NVMEs, there's no more to play with. When we look at the TerraMaster, that's got 4 M.2 bays and an output of a 5GBE. Any one of those bays could massively oversaturate that connection. In 2026, 5GBE has fallen behind the speed of most of the hard drives and SSDs that we buy today en masse. Hard drives, once you get into 30 terabytes, by the way, a lot of these hard drives are cranking out 270 to 80 megabytes per second. That's not even going into multiple actuator drives like the Mac series, which can hit 400 to 500 megabytes per second. So 5GBE still serves as something of a throttling of the performance of your storage media versus that of 10 GBE and greater. And this last one, I am sure, if no one's put this in the comments by the end of this video, I'm amazed. And that is, why use glue and sellotape when, if you're upgrading, use nails and screws? If you're going to be upgrading your network to 5 GBE, you have just drastically lowered your glass ceiling. 10 GBE not only has it become more affordable, but the technology around 10 GBE, everything from SFP to Cat45 adapters, everything from the 10 GBE Thunderbolt adapters and USB adapters at $100. It has all become not only more affordable, but a lot more established. And the result is, if you're going to be upgrading your network, yes, you can modularly upgrade bits and bobs to 5 GBE, but the time and energy you're committing in there, scale up towards 10 GBE. It's a much higher glass ceiling, and you will have a greater greater long distance hardware lifespan and network access without throttling down the road. Case in point, this NAS from TerraMaster, the F4 SSD, is a bloody great NAS, but in terms of local network access, everything is being shared over 5 GBE. That's 5 to 550 megabytes per second, give or take. They're outputting from those SSDs. That means 5 clients have immediately only got 100 megs each to play with, which on a network is great, depending on their use case and if they're backing up at the same time. Scaling up over time, more clients, more aggressive storage media, larger data requirements, these are all factors that end up filling and oversaturating the network over time. Upgrading towards 10 GBE will be more expensive, but it gives you a much larger service life and data growth rate from your over network. And it is just something, if you're scaling up towards 5 GBE in a more modular fashion, rather than looking at the standard class SMB fully featured solutions, which now feature 5G as standard, the argument remains the same. 10 GBE gives you a greater scope for growth. But that's really it. Thank you so much again to ASUS and TerraMaster for supplying the 5 GBE NAS solutions that we've tested here on the channel, because I do genuinely believe 5 gig networking is a bloody good thing. In the same way when 2.5 gig rolled out, replacing 1 gig networking and therefore pushing everyone else in the NAS space to put the bloody hours in and scale up their level of hardware. Are you listening, Synology? I've got to give credit to brands like TerraMaster and ASUS Store that did it first. The DIY NAS solution market has a few 5 gig network solutions, but it's only been in the last 6 to 8 months that we've seen brands like them break into 5 GBE more affordably at the turnkey NAS level, where others are now looking at these as the standard hardware level. So again, credit to you guys for this, but let me know what you guys think. Do you think 5 GBE is a waste of time? Or were you someone that was barely taking advantage of 2.5 GBE and therefore 5 gig is going to give you more than enough longevity for your hardware? Let me know below. There are links towards both of these solutions and all of the kit and caboodles that I've talked about today linked below. So if you want to support what we do, you have found the video helpful and you were going to go to those stores anyway, make sure those three things are true, please use those links. We get a small commission here at NAS Compares for any of those things that you buy on there. And that little bit of commission doesn't cost you any extra. You support creators at no additional cost to yourself. And it allows me and Eddie, just us doing this, to keep doing what we do. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.